All right. Well, I guess first things first. Hello. I'm Cole, and
This is Johnny.
yes, that is Johnny.
Well,
Uh,
this is the first and hopefully a long line of videos that we want to do for everybody. To begin with, as you can tell, this video is titled Kevin Stories. Well, Kevin is a very unique person, and I guess to begin with, I'll let the person who knows Kevin best start talking about him.
all right. I can go ahead and start doing that. First of all, just a little tiny bit of background. Kevin is something similar. Those of you who may know something about past life regressions or things along that nature, just understanding your past lives. Those of you who know something about that will understand this a bit better. Those of you who are skeptical about it will have no clue. So, just go ahead and be clueless for a little while. You'll get into it anyways.
Well, you know we're going to have to bleep that out, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
Okay.
You know how funny it would be if we didn't, though, right?
No, bleep it anyways. No, we're going to
Anyways.
have to edit that entire
Of course. But, when I was, I'd say somewhere around 3 or 4, it might have been a little earlier or a little later, I'm not entirely sure. Kevin generally doesn't talk to me in words, and if he does, he more or less just brute force shoves them right out my mouth, and, all of a sudden I end up saying them. But generally speaking, he doesn't talk to me in words. It is pictures and colors and smells and, if you've ever stood in a very beautiful forest clearing or out on a beach and you feel that atmosphere difference versus really anywhere else that you could be, he speaks to me with those sorts of imagery.
Would you say it's imagery or the core thought form of what he's trying to
Both. It would depend on what exactly he's really telling me. For example, my aspect of it, think back to what you did this morning, right when you first woke up. The very basic routine that you went through for the first 10 minutes of your day. Now, at this point, you should still be able to remember that relatively vividly, and you can, when you think about it, you almost go back and you're almost reliving it. Well, that's very similar to what my memories from Kevin are like, I'm flashing back to a time and place that I've never been. I as in Cole, not I as in Kevin. It kind of is an interesting line that, to me, is so very natural. Pardon us, Johnny's phone loves to make noises. For future recordings, we're gonna have to make sure not to have that. But, anyways, it's mostly videos that are a bit more immersive than just a video. It's a memory that I'm going back into. When I was very young, I first started gaining access to some of them. Though it was more along the lines of a good friend coming over, hey, you've got to check this out, look at this. And, roll video. As I've gotten older, though, they've kind of, a lot of them are reruns of some of my favorite points, but, when you live as long as he did, let's just say that there's an awful lot of memories there to go through, and I'm pretty sure that even though I'm going through them lightning fast inside my own head, as opposed to how quickly the actual event went down.
Now, would you say it's more like an instant download and then playing the video? Or is it just playing at super speeds and with that?
It's an instant download and then it plays the video, and the video itself does play a bit faster than actual real time, I think. I don't know, maybe it actually did just go that fast there. I really don't know. Kevin is one of my past incarnations from a completely different dimension, very similar, to our own in that it was quite physical. If you get slapped in the face, it does kind of sting and burn a little bit, and you feel slightly humiliated. Unless it was your wife, in which case you're ashamed. But
what type of climate and environments were there in this alternate dimension?
Well, at that point, I suppose it depends on which planet you're on. If you're on Kevin's planet, however, rather similar to our own. However, there's significantly less water on the planet. It had two major continents, as far as large land masses are concerned. And then there was ocean separating them. There was a few smaller islands out amidst everything else. But really just the two continents. As far as, like, polar ice caps, that was actually frozen land, not water. The majority of the water was near the equator of the planet. Planet. Blah, blah, blah. Press 1 for English.
Now, give us a bit more description of the way the planet operates versus what we know now.
With Earth, I'm not going to get too much into what I'm about to talk about. I'm just going to kind of flush over some of it. Humanity really didn't evolve here on Earth. I mean, as a creature, we have evolved. But, since we arrived here. But that kind of right there was the key word there. Arrive. We didn't exactly start here. We are a very broad species that has been moved all over the known universe as well as unknown universe. Because, bear in mind, how often do they discover new bits and pieces of existence that we weren't previously aware of? Last I knew, that was a few times a day.
Yeah.
So, obviously, as far as the whole universe is concerned, we know nothing! That's about what all of our knowledge amounts to, is right somewhere between squat and zip.
I like the point you're bringing that one, Marco.
But I'm going off on one of my famous tangents.
I think this discussion would be better suited for the Hello World show.
Which, by the way, will be coming out depending on how all of you respond to this and this, that, and the other. But anyways, I digress. As far as Kevin's planet was concerned, all creatures do evolve to better suit the environment in which they are in. If they are surrounded by more intelligent creatures, they will evolve and become more intelligent themselves to better interact with the other creatures. This is simple base thing. We see this in nature all the time. To those of you that happen to have pets, have you ever noticed how your dog and your cat can, on occasion, be looking at each other and you'd swear they're just talking up a storm about you, maybe? Or, about what kind of food, or the dog's making fun of the cat because he gets his own special treats that the cat doesn't get, or whatever you think your pets might be saying to each other. Rest assured, yes, they are. Science has confirmed pets do communicate to one another.
They also watch TV.
Yes. Kitty cats watching TV. Or dogs. Or really any animal, for that matter. Well, that has eyes, I suppose. We would need eyes and ears.
There's TV providers that do provide pet programming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually seen some of that. But anyways, once again, we digress. We should almost call this the Tangent Show. No, that would be a bad idea. That'd just be inviting it to happen.
Most of these things are bad.
Yes.
Maybe play back at another time.
But, in Kevin's reality, all creatures, for the most part, over time evolved to the point of what we would consider sentience. There were humans, of a fashion. More of a proto-human, really. But nonetheless human. Or at least would become so, eventually, had they not died off. Or been killed off, rather, as you'll find out later. But all creatures eventually evolved into sentience. Kevin himself was of a brand that... I'm not entirely sure how I can say that word in English, but what I will say is that, well, in English I suppose we would call them wolfmen, but that's not what they were. Just bear with me, we're talking alternate dimension here. Alternate dimension reality shift thing. Go. But all creatures over time evolved to the point where they were sentient. Many of them were biped, but not all. Biped being 2 legs. I use big words. Yeah, big words. I like big words. Most of the creatures on the planet were bipeds. Most of them were intelligent to varying different degrees. Pretty much all of the ones that you'll hear me talking about, for the most part, yeah, they were intelligent enough to where, yeah, you could walk over and have a conversation with them, and they very easily could outsmart you. Wake up call, humanity. Most of you are not all that intelligent. Myself sometimes included in that. Yes, that is called being human. But anyways, once again, we digress. In Kevin's overall reality, he was of a lupine descent. He was a very powerful sorcerer. The boundaries between the mind and reality in that particular dimension were much thinner, I suppose you could say, than they are here. In this reality, the only time that your thinking seems to massively branch out into physical reality, in the sense that we would kind of like it to, is, for example, the thinking to reach out and or to stand up and walk around or something.
What you're getting at with this is magic was there and functional and worked how we all think it should.
Just about, at least early on. Eventually, the limit of all the various species got to be broader and broader and kind of pushed it out of reach. But early on, for at least the first 3 quarters or so of Kevin's life, it was very easy to use. Very easy to use. It was also, by that same token, extremely dangerous. And pretty much everybody realized that. For example, if you can't imagine this, then you're screwed. You need an imagination here. But imagine being able to willy-nilly, just as you please, shoot fire, lightning, and spaghetti from your fingertips, whatever you happen to choose at the moment. Just blah, spaghetti! And, you're shooting it from your fingertips because you're thinking about it and choosing to shoot it from your fingertips. The capability of doing that, once you start shooting spaghetti from your fingertips, you don't stop shooting spaghetti from your fingertips because it's just such an addictive feeling of this energy transfer. But that's something that we'll get into more later.
Well, you start to set the stage here. Let's go ahead and do a brief overview of what other major players there are on this planet, and then start getting into the basics of Kevin's beginnings.
As far as major players, as in other major figures?
Other major races.
Oh, other major races. Okay.
Species.
Well, you have several...
Give the people an idea of what other species and ideals Kevin generally have to deal with.
Okay, well, during his early portion of his life, his lupine-esque society, they tended to be very, they stuck to themselves for the most part. However, in a world full of all sorts of other critters, you're not only going to be able to stay purely amongst yourselves for very long.
Now, what are some of the other critters?
Yep. To the south of where Kevin generally spent most of his life, or much of it.
Don't worry, I'll have them put together a map for you folks so you can have an understanding of what's going on these directions.
To the south, once you got past the mountains, there was a very large city that sprung up over time right along the coast, and that was primarily occupied by very similar to what we would consider to be otters. But they had basically created a city out of little tidal pools and other areas coming in from the ocean. That was Caladian, which was huge. Lots of people. Not just otters either. They tend to be very friendly. And basically, so long as you don't mess their up, they won't mess you up. There's a lot more of them than there are you. Kind of like ants in that respect. But that was just down to the south. Up to the north, you tended to have other forms of what I suppose kind of consider to be canines, though I suppose this first one I'm going to mention really isn't. But there were some vaguely hyena-esque creatures, slightly different markings, really, but otherwise very similar. That's occupied primarily to the north, northeast, and further east. Directly east of the Peony Valley, there was a pretty big desert right in there. The mountains to the west of the Peony Valley, generally speaking, would soak all of the moisture out of the air before it got much further into the continent, and that created this gigantic desert right in the middle of the continent. But that was mostly unoccupied. You don't live in the desert, cross the desert. But just east of the Peony Valley, right before you get to the desert, there's a large forest in that area that stretches up and it meets up with the mountains that helped form the Peony Valley, which, in case you haven't noticed, Peony Valley is where Kevin was from. That was home, always was, always would be. But it was named after a particular flower that we'll get into more detail on it later, but long story short, they used this particular flower as a cash crop. Big cash crop. Going on the different races. Over in the forested area, you would have lots of. There were cervines, deer, elk type creatures. Antlered. That's part of the big thing right there. Was antlers were very common. And other like woodland type stuff that you would almost expect to find here. Squirrels, stuff like that. A lot of these creatures actually did evolve to sentience, and many of them did actually still live in forested areas. And generally speaking, they would eat original diets plus a bit of extra. Many of these creatures, such as, for example, canine, this is actually, it's not something that's really unique to Earth. It is a particular design set that just so happens to work very well for what it's designed to do, and is something that is not just an Earth thing. Other realities frequently have similar shapes and designs to what we find here on Earth. The reason being for that is, well,
incredibly efficient designs for similar archetype realities or planetary archetypes.
Yes.
Environmental archetypes.
Yes. Very good way to put it. But let's see. You generally had mostly woodland-like creatures. Servines. Yeah, sure. I'll have a cigarette. Nice. But they lived out to the east, right on the edge of the forest before you got into the desert. There's a few small hills over in that area that were very rocky, kind of as you were getting into the desert, right there on that edge, more or less. There were a lot of avians that seemed to really like that area, avians being bird-like creatures. Feathers instead of fur. Some of them could fly. Pretty much all of them could still glide. Probably not. Kind of have to be somehow airborne to do that. But, there were a lot of bird-like creatures over in that area. Additionally, you would find bears. They kind of migrated. They were all over the place in small numbers.
So, now you can talk about some of these as woodland-type creatures and avians. Now, I'm sure a lot of other people would be wondering this, as a matter of fact, I'm a bit curious. Now, are most of these major species that you are mentioning still in their original form on the four legs, or had some of them also...
Both versions actually could be found. In particular, I was referring to I'm just going to say intelligent. They might not have actually fully gone bipedal or to a form that we would consider to be higher evolved. But, there were parrots that could fly up, and they know full languages, and they will have a conversation with you if you decide to talk back. But otherwise, it pretty much looks like a parrot. Scarlet macaw. Think scarlet macaw, only a bit bigger. About twice the size, really. 2 to 3 times the size. And it basically can have a full conversation with you. And if you didn't look at it, you might not realize, it's just a bird. But at that point, you're doing a massive disservice to both yourself and the other creature. To say, it's just a bird. This is an intelligent creature. Not just a dumb animal. But there were also some of the smaller ones that, basically the best they got is a little bit of mimicry. They do exist. But the ones I'm referring to are intelligent. Almost all creatures on this planet were. They, however, also had the lesser evolved versions. There was a split somewhere.
Alright. And continue on with the different species, or was that it?
That's not quite it, but that is the majority of what he had contact with. During kind of the earlier middle years of his life, he did spend a large amount of his time traveling all around the world. So, he did meet a lot of them, but he didn't really spend a lot of time with most of the ones he met. So, you have mole creatures that live under the ground. You wouldn't recognize them if you looked between that and a mole as we know them here on Earth. But, unless you looked at the claws. The claws were very similar. But otherwise, no, very, very different looking. They did live underground, primarily. They surfaced for here and there. But pretty much everything they needed was underground, so they were kind of difficult to track down. pretty much every creature that exists here on Earth, there was an intelligent version of it there. Pretty much. I mean, there are exceptions. For example, insects, for the most part, they got bigger. But as far as what we're talking about when we say intelligence, we can't really say that they quite had that. We couldn't really communicate with them. Certain insects, you might be able to train them in the same sense that you're on Earth. You can train a dog to do certain tricks. Well, you can train a giant wasp to do certain tricks if you're willing to potentially die from getting stung once. Very poisonous. Very, very poisonous.
And now that we have kind of a set stage, why don't you go ahead and tell us Kevin's story?
Okay, well, I guess where should I begin? Probably at the beginning.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and make this sort of a chronological thing.
I just figured get a baseline down for them to understand. And then we can do some hop around in the later years, because there's a lot more going on.
Yeah, once you learn how to hop dimensions and play with some really kooky magic.
Right now, let's just give them a sense of how you came up.
Okay, so nutshell version of the early years, basically. Okay. When he was very young, maybe 1 year old, maybe, if that old, his mother abandoned them with her brother and his wife. In Lupine society, for a female to have pups and not have a life mate was big, bad no-no. Don't do that. Not at that point in time. Yeah, social taboo. You're highly looked down upon for pretty much ever, and so are your children, if you didn't have a life mate when you had them. That generally wasn't that much of an issue.
For most of you that understand your history, go back about 100 years, it would be the same way with women that had children that had a husband.
Yeah, pretty much socially screwed. But, rather than putting herself and her children through that, she fostered them to her brother and his wife, who at the time had no children. Got two now. But, after she did that, she basically disappeared. On further magic, she basically went off alone and died by herself, alone. It was in the middle of winter. Kevin's first original memory. I say original because he was able to go back and travel following his own timeline and witness, his own birth from the perspective of a fly that was, sitting on a branch 30 feet away. But with all of the... We're gonna have to edit this part. But, he grew up with his aunt and uncle. As a male in the tribe, he was basically being raised to understand how to grow the small amount of crops that they did work with. The land, generally speaking, was far too weedy to really grow most crops. There were a lot of creeping vines that would choke crop plants. And then in that particular valley, there was the peony flowers, which grew like nobody's business, and you could have an entire field of it's kind of sort of almost like wheat or barley, sort of, but it's a planetary variety thereof. And it would just choke that right out, dead. Not a single stalk would grow to be more than 3 inches tall. And they're not mature until they're, almost 2 feet tall. So you're kind of screwed on that one. But, the few crops that they did grow, were more tubers that would grow underground. They had a potato-like plant that had a very tough inner texture. You had to boil it to even make it soft enough to where it could be eaten. Otherwise, it was like, imagine trying to chew up a raw pumpkin or a watermelon rind. Tougher than heck. But you boil it and it has a nice texture, and then basically you can bake it after that, and it would almost have like a meaty type texture. But, anyways, enough about some of their food. But, learning how to grow that, and primarily hunting, was his other big thing. He was kind of a natural prodigy with a bow and arrow, which was, more of like a ranged secondary weapon of sorts. I mean, generally speaking, if by the time you figure out where your prey is, if you're close enough to it, you don't bother loosing an arrow, you just run it down and break its neck.
How did hunting usually go in this type of society?
Generally speaking, the family or the hunter rather, that got it, basically had first dibs on bits and pieces. Everything that they didn't take, they gave to everyone else. And basically
this was a pack hunt.
Sometimes that would happen. Kevin wasn't alive while that was still occurring. Pack hunts were kind of a thing of the past because they had gone to settling in specific areas, and they farmed more, and they didn't need to have that kind of an impact on the wildlife in the surrounding area. So instead of going out on pack hunts where they might take out an entire herd of docile, non-intelligent deer or other similar creatures, instead of taking out a whole pack, it might be a single hunter that might take out, one, maybe two. But much smaller impact, but they would generally go off either by themselves or in pairs and go hunting. Generally speaking, there was almost always someone that was out of town hunting at any given time on any given day. It was kind of a general way it tended to work out. Generally speaking, Kevin would go hunting every 3 or 4 days. And the hills, which went up into mountains, directly on the northern edge of the Caney Valley, is generally where Kevin would head off to go hunting because he liked the game that tended to kind of come closer to town. Didn't have to carry it as far, not to mention you're carrying it downhill pretty much the whole way. His sister actually would frequently go with him, and usually she's the one that would end up carrying whatever he shot. He was a better shot with a bow, and, his sister was just huge. If you have the Hulk as a traveling companion, and you are all carrying your own individual backpacks, you really probably aren't thinking this out in the most efficient manner possible. Kevin's sister grew to be almost twice his size. She developed something kind of near gigantism. She was large by any standard for her species. I mean, a large male, which was generally, males were typically larger than females, just like the humans. A large male, she still towered over him. And generally speaking, she was the one that carried most of his stuff, except for on the occasion that she stayed behind. But Kevin was a very skilled bow hunter. His big trick that he liked, which most of the other village hunters could do just as well as he could, was that, they can hear their prey before they see them. And they can smell them long before that. Makes it really easy to hunt and track that way when, you walk past a tree and you can smell that a deer has been by here quite recently. Walk a circle around the tree and you can tell where the smell is stronger and where it's weaker. You know which direction it's going, what direction it was moving in when it passed this tree. Follow the smell. Soon enough, you'll be able to hear them. Move quietly, and you can get close enough to shoot. Move really quietly, and you can get close enough to basically walk over to it and just snap mine. Kevin really got his start in, as far as magic and all of that was concerned. Kevin was a sorcerer. For him, using magic was yet easier than the reality already allowed for it to be. And he actually was using magic before he ever even realized he was using magic whenever he would go hunting, because he was the arrow. Literally, as in, it's almost like a guided arrow. He is the arrow. He's guiding it. He can make it go in loop-de-loops through the air if he dang well pleases. But if the target lifts its head right at the most inopportune moment, the arrow will arc in the air and still go right through the neck, right through the spinal cord, paralyzed and dead. One shot. It was quite rare that he ever had to actually track something that he'd already shot. Quite rare. It was also quite rare that it took more than one of them. Eventually, if you kill and skin and, dress and all of that stuff, enough critters, you kind of get to the point where you realize, hey, there's a nifty little hole right at the back of the eye socket where the bone is a lot thinner right there. So if I can target my arrow to go right in that hole, I can get straight to the brain without even having to damage the skull, and I barely even have to go through it. Straight to the brain, straight to the dirt.
Sounds like he was really efficient at hunting.
He tried very much. I think this is actually probably where I get it, being as of all the memories that are in my mind, of all the memories that are in my mind, I have more memories of me as Kevin than I do of me as Cole. So if I'm a little bit strange in the actual reality portion, that's probably why, is because I'm more not me than I am me, as far as memories are concerned. Yes, very efficient in pretty much everything he does. Efficiency is a big thing. For him. Other people tended to go with tradition.
Nothing wrong with going traditionally every once in a while.
Every once in a while, no, but when you're giving up all of the efficiency in something that just kind of needs to be done anyways. For example, if you had to go through a 2-hour-long ritual before using the bathroom every time you had to use the bathroom, how much time would you be wasting just because you wake up in the morning and you gotta pee? Quite a bit. Oh, but it's tradition. I mean, cases like that, or of similar nature, tradition should probably be abandoned.
Yeah.
But, yeah, some stuff you can get away with it. But, while Kevin was out hunting with his sister, they had actually gotten, two smaller elk-like creatures, and they were on their way back out of the mountain, back off the mountain, back to the valley, and they were taking a slightly longer route, that was a bit easier to travel. It didn't require hopping down any cliffs. I mean, they weren't very big cliffs. They're only 4 to 6 feet high. But when your sister is carrying 2 small elk, which are pretty good size, anyways, one on each shoulder, for her sake, may as well just take the slightly longer route just because she doesn't have to try and figure out how we're going to get them down there, because Kevin was actually small by most lupine standards. He was a bit on the short. He was shorter than the average female. I mean, not by much at that point, but 6'2" by our scales was about where he stood, whereas your average female was right around 6'3", 6'4", with your average male being 6'6", 6'8", somewhere kind of in that range. And then you have his sister, who's near 8 feet tall. I mean, if that puts it into a little bit better of a perspective for you of just how big she was. I mean, huge. Gigantism, huge. But she was carrying the 2 elk, and on their way out of the hills, they found it because there was a crossbow bolt, or a really short arrow. He didn't know yet at that point, but it looked like it was way too short of an arrow to have come from a regular bow. Found that near the base of a tree in the dirt, and it just went back to where it would have had to have come from if it was pointing the right direction. And they found a small, little bloody spot. 4 corpses, and 1 dude almost dead. Rorn, was another lupine, but he was traveling and kind of had some people that he'd been working with that tried to get rid of him, and, well, it didn't completely work. He was a mercenary. That was his overall life story right there. Mercenary. He was born to a couple that were mercenaries, and, well, when you're a kid born to a mom and dad who are mercenaries, what do you think you're going to be? But he wintered with them, with Kevin's tribe, and the following spring, when he was leaving, he was going to head south to Caladian, and basically Kevin went with him. It wasn't really, it was breaking tradition, but because he was leaving with another wolf, or another lupine, it prefers that I say lupine instead of wolf, but sometimes the longer word just kind of trips skips my tongue. Basically, so long as you're leaving with another of your own kind, you leaving isn't really such a bad thing. But he took on life as a mercenary, on the way to Palladium. Lorna actually showed him a small, tiny little bit of magic. How to start a campfire in the rain.
So with that statement, you're saying small magic use was common.
It's small, yes. Almost everybody actually could do a small bit here and there. But generally speaking, most people... Okay, your average person, I mean, strict baseline average, probably doesn't really know how to use magic, but they probably actually do use it on occasion without even realizing it. Most people would have some sort of a talent or something that they tend to do pretty well, and frequently it was because they were using a small amount of magic to assist with it. For example, Carpenter, he understands working with wood so well that he can actually split the grain of the wood so that it's almost like it's already been sanded smooth, and he's doing it with a pocket knife. He's cutting, planing, and sanding all in one shave. And everybody thinks he's just a really good carpenter, but in all reality he's actually using a small piece of magic as he's doing it. He doesn't realize that that's what he's doing, because, he doesn't believe or use that magic stuff, but he's actually using it and doesn't even realize it. It's also why it is that he enjoys doing carpentry so much. It's because, once again, we're getting back into that energy flow, and opening that energy flow up is just such a euphoric feeling that you can't really help but get addicted to it. And that's what would kind of lead to power dancing amongst wizards and sorcerers.
You say power dancing. Describe for people what that is.
An easy way for me to describe it would almost be... No, I can't really say this with entire certainty, but I'm just, from people that I've met, certain drugs that are instantly addictive because it's just too good. It just makes you feel so amazing to do it and so alive to do this drug that's just instantly addicting. That's kind of like what using magic was like.
I was talking about actual power dancing.
Power dancing itself is
you open it like Tai Chi almost.
Not quite. No. I would actually more describe power dancing. If you'll stick with kind of a crazy metaphor for just a moment, you're out with a gun that is somehow magicked and has a bottomless clip. Okay, and you're just out target shooting. And you shoot the target a couple times, and hey, this is so much fun. So eventually you just decide to pull down and hold the trigger and just keep shooting, and I love shooting this thing! Then, you turn over and, fuck you, truck, and you shoot the truck. Yeah, I shot the truck. Hey, look, there's a wall there, I'm gonna blow the crap out of that wall. So you blow the crap out of the wall. Hey, look, a tree, let's blow that crap out of the tree. Blah! And you blow up the tree, and you're having so much fun shooting. And you just love shooting this bottomless clip gun. It's full auto, it's got a nice kick to it. Bang, 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 bang. Oh, this is so much fun. And then eventually you get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm gonna take a breather for a second here. That's a little too much fun for now. And you look around and you say, how the heck am I gonna get home now? Because I shot the truck. Oh, and look at that. I don't even have a beer, because I shot the beer. Oh, and look at that. I can't even go use the bathroom, because there is no bathroom anymore. I shot that too. Hey, there isn't even a wall for me to go pee on, because look at that. It's a pile of gravel now because I shot it so much. And basically, power dancing is you get momentarily addicted to the euphoric feeling of that energy flow, and you don't choose to stop it. And you basically, power dancing is when you put out more power than you initially intended to, and you end up breaking things that you didn't want to break. That's where magic really gets to be dangerous, because once you start learning a little bit of it and you start actually using it, learning how to use it and using it are two extremely different things. Because you can teach somebody how to do almost anything. Are they actually going to do it? Maybe, maybe not. Magic, same thing. You can teach people how to use it all you want. It's up to them to actually use it. Well, power dancing is when you start using it and you just become so momentarily addicted to how amazing it feels to use it that you don't stop using it and stop yourself from breaking things that you didn't want to break or overdoing what you were trying to do. Alright. Kevin learned how to start a small fire, basically by rubbing particles together with his mind. To quote a movie, clear your mind, see the molecules, make them shake. What is that from? Sorcerer's Apprentice?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Disney Sorcerer's.
Yes. With, Nicolas Cage? Yeah. Good movie. Anyways, you know, that actually is one of the things they happen to get spot on with that movie. That little concept there. Yes. But, Kevin actually learned that while traveling with Rorn, and that was really about as far as Rorn's magic really went. Other than that, he was incredibly precise with a short sword, and Kevin always kind of suspected that that was probably where the majority of Rorn's magic really went to, was the fact that he literally could split a falling hair in midair, and if you wanted him to prove it to you, you could stop the short sword a millimeter away from the end of the hair, so it's still stuck on the blade, and he can hand it to that person. Yes, quite. It really was neat. Probably also why it is that he was bloody and wounded instead of dead when attacked by, 4 other guys. I can see that.
Yeah.
That would make sense. Actually, that's probably what the case was, but unfortunately he died before Kevin really became much more powerful than, a few little tricks here and there. Unfortunately, because he died prior to that. Rorn died doing mercenary work. They were ambushed by humanoid creatures. My initial thing in my head kind of wanted to say that it was kind of like a goblin, but I don't want to say goblin. Pygmy sounds good. It's not quite pygmy, they're bigger than that. But not by much. They're kind of short. But, small group of them had gotten too close to a town. They went to go and move them. Which, generally speaking, actually is... You could sometimes actually get away with moving these creatures without actually having to kill any of them. If you happen to get lucky enough to figure out which one was the leader, capture the leader, put him in a cage so that they can all see their leader. They will try to free him. But the leader on the back of a cart or back of a flatbed in this cage where they could all see him, and you drive away. What do you think the whole clan does? They follow the leader. It was actually rather remarkable. But they were going to try and do that, but unfortunately they had, their little short bows, which the arrows they shot wouldn't really do too much to you. I mean, they'd penetrate like inch and a half. So, I mean, if they got you in a vital spot, yeah, it'll get you. But you're wearing armor, it's not going to penetrate that far. It'll poke you. Hurt. That's about it. But, unfortunately, Kevin fired an arrow at one of them, and it went right past Rorn. It wouldn't have hit him, but Rorn brought his sword up and tried to deflect the arrow as it was going by him, and he deflected it right into himself. And that wasn't a goblin arrow, that was Kevin's arrow, which have, a head on it this long, because it's basically a giant needle. Doesn't take much for that thing to penetrate. And as it penetrates, the heads would splinter. The only reason that they were reusable is because if you pulled it out nice and slow, it wouldn't break apart, and then the blood from whatever you just shot it with would act as a glue to stick it back together as you pulled it out, and all of these little strands of, it was a horn, actually, would basically go back together, and it'd form a pointed tip again. Then as soon as you shoot something else with it, those tips are going to spread apart again, and it'll rip stuff apart once it gets inside. If you shoot like a tree or something like that with it, though, you might lose a couple strands, but no biggie. Eventually you'll, wear the head out, and it'll work. Just replace the head at that point. Arrows are one of those things. If you can, always go and collect your arrows, because they're kind of a to make. It's mostly the fletching, to be honest. But, anyways, Rorn ended up killing himself with one of Kevin's arrows. Or Kevin killed Rorn by not arcing the arrow further away from him. As we can kind of take that however you will. Combat accident. That pretty much covers it right there. Kevin completed the contract and returned to Caladium and cashed it in. After that, he wasn't really sure what to do, and he actually kind of almost became an urchin for a little while. Beggar of sorts. I mean, not really a beggar per se, more like small job, odd job handyman, with small spurts of mercenary work here and there. He didn't really want to go out on any major contracts like he had done without another person with him, and he hadn't found anyone he liked well enough to ask him to go with. But after a short period of time, it was actually during a demonstration that the Academy was doing in Caladium that he actually ended up manifesting. The way that most of the mages, be them sorcerers or wizards or combinations thereof, tended to group together with each other so that they could pass ideas back and forth and co-expand their own knowledge. And they, as a means of figuring out who was inclined in that way, they would frequently do what they would call demonstrations, which basically imagine a bunch of wizards putting on a circus for you. And you more or less have what these things were like. I mean, there's no real rides, per se. Well, no, sometimes there could be, but probably not. But mostly it was performance, where it's exhibition would be another good way to describe it. Basically a bunch of wizards and sorcerers going up on a stage and using magic in front of a bunch of people. They were really neat shows. Every now and then they'd come in and they'd actually have a project to do. For example, in Caladian, they actually constructed the entire tavern that they ended up staying in for the rest of the time that they were there for the next several days. The tavern was actually not built, it was that they cleared the ground for it, and they left it like that because that's what they were supposed to do, the original builders. They cleared rocks and rubble out the way and just left kind of a patch of dirt. And during the exhibition, they actually went and created a tavern there. Levitating building materials, nails flying through the air to go and embed themselves in the perfect spot in the wood to have put them. And then the wood will, crack and shear itself on a perfectly planed and cut line. And then the, board that just separated itself out of, a tree that still has branches and leaves on it. This board separates itself out there and goes and floats up onto the wall where, 6 nails fly out and go tack it up. Rather spectacular looking show. Every now and then they'd actually get hired out to go and do construction type work. Usually it was larger buildings that they would go and do that way. And in that way, sometimes they would even construct the buildings from the top down. The top floor of the building is completed and livable, but it is completely inaccessible because it is currently floating. But it was during one of those exhibitions that Kevin first had his first major energetic flow begin. And it really started off because he started playing around with creating fire that Warren had taught him how to do. And he opened up a larger channel and basically put more energy into it than he'd originally anticipated doing. And instead of creating a fire, he created more of like a little living flame. Basically a thumb-sized fire elemental, more or less. Powerful little critter it could have been, but generally speaking, the exhibitions, if a sorcerer or wizard was going to manifest one of those flows, that really makes it oh so obvious that they are supposed to be a mage, because they have the aptitude for it. Generally speaking, they would manifest at one of those exhibitions, which makes it really easy to figure out who the next generation of wizards and sorcerers is going to be. It's the ones that'll end up having some really nifty reactions during the exhibitions. So it was also kind of a recruiting ploy that worked very well. But Kevin manifested during one of them and went to a Wizards Academy for, I want to say he was there for like 2 years. Something like that. Yeah, because he was done after about 10. He was done with his stuff, and then he stayed along teaching and continuing his own studies for several years after that. So yeah, it would have been about 14. About 14 years he spent at a Wizards Academy. One little thing that anybody who plays D&D would probably understand this already. Wizards and sorcerers are 2 different things. A wizard learns magic in the sense that action A leads to action B, which yields result C. Action A plus action C equals result Q. Very strict pattern. If you want to do this, basically they try and say that there's only one way to skin a cat, to those of you who are familiar with that expression. Whereas a sorcerer, they create magic on the fly. There is no real method that needs to be taken for any given spell. The method is basically whatever they feel like doing to accomplish that result this time. But I'm seeing that we're actually getting to be rather lengthy here. We're already up over an hour, so go ahead and probably just go ahead and call it a night there. So I need to get to bed for work in the morning.
Yep. All right. Night, everybody. Catch you next week.
Yep. Have a good night. Toodles.